topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Well, good afternoon. Good to have you with us. I'm Bill Martinez. Great to have you with us, sharing a part of your day. For more information on the show, you can check it out, BillMartinezShow.com. Alex Newman, CEO of Liberty Sentinel Media and senior editor for the New American Magazine, is going to be joining us in just a moment to talk about the targeted takedown indictment of Donald Trump. No doubt a deep state revenge tactic. Donald Trump went after them, and what we're realizing now is the deep state has become and probably has been the fourth branch of government for a long time. Alex Newman, welcome to the show. Good to have you with us.
Here, thank you so much for having me, Bill.
Well, Alex, is that a fair statement that the deep state has become the fourth branch of government?
You know, I don't even know if I would use the word become, because this has been going on, unfortunately, for a very long time. The difference is Donald Trump forced them to reveal themselves because he was just unstoppable. And they got to the point where they just kind of came out of the closet. They didn't care anymore who saw it. And that brings us to today, where they don't care if we know that they're stealing elections. They don't care if we know that the Department of Justice is a clown car persecuting political enemies of the regime. They just don't care anymore. So they really have revealed themselves as really, I would almost call it the shadow government, or as I say in the subtitle of my book, the invisible government behind the scenes.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Alex, they have gotten control of the media, social media, certainly. It is quite the cabal. Mainstream media, they've got it all under their thumb, including the Justice Department, whether we're talking about the FBI, the IRS, all the three-letter agencies. It seems to be falling under the purview of the deep state.
Yeah, it does. And unfortunately, it's gotten more and more extreme, the control of these institutions. Again, it's been, they've been quietly accumulating power for a long time. If you look, for example, at efforts to take over the media, these began at least 100 years ago when a cabal of insiders said, hey, how do we get control, generally speaking? They're not going to control every little town newspaper, but they thought, how do we get control of the general move in the media? And they figured out they could just buy a few dozen of the top newspapers, and that would trickle down to every local yokel newspaper. That's where they're going to be taking their cues from the New York Times, the Washington Compost. Then the internet comes along and kind of disrupts that. And so in comes In-Q-Tel, right? The investment arm of the intelligence community, to start propping up these tech companies like Google, like Facebook, make sure that they become dominant players. And when I was in journalism school, Bill, I can't tell you how many times our professors told us, you are the gatekeepers. You're going to determine what the American people say. Like, man, you guys are like 10 years behind. You haven't heard of this thing called internet? You people are not gatekeepers of anything anymore. And so then they came back around with Google, with Facebook, with Twitter, with all the big tech companies to try to regain that position of gatekeeper so that information would not flow freely. And there was a brief period of maybe a few years where we really did have this incredible flow of information. It caused millions of people to wake up, and now they're trying to figure out how to deal with that.
Well, I would say also, Alex, what contributed to this was consolidation. I was in the broadcasting industry, so I saw radio and TV stations being bought up where before you could not own but a couple of entities plus a newspaper. The FCC outlines were pretty restrictive. But when consolidation came around, ironically enough, what it was, why it was introduced was so that it would promote minority involvement and minority ownership of broadcast entities. But, like everything that has to do with the government, you always get these unintended consequences, and it isn't even close to that. I mean, you may had a few minority stockholders involved in broadcasting, but by and large, broadcasting entities, radio and TV, are handled by maybe two handfuls of entities anymore.
Yep. And it's really disturbing when you start looking at the ownership structure of the media. And it's actually not just the media. If you look at the international business architecture, and in fact, there was a study published on this in 2011 in the Swiss journal PLOS1. What you find is that all these companies that look like they're independent, they're competing, the control of these all flows back to this tiny core. And that is very much true in the news media and also in the entertainment industry. You have this tiny group of companies with interlocking boards where you have entities like BlackRock owning huge stakes in these companies, where this tiny little group of people basically has control over the editorial policy of news that reaches 95+% of the American people.
Yeah, between BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, the holy trinity of corporate America. I mean, they swing a big stick and they have a lot of influence, and they're in the newsrooms of America today, controlling basically what it's come down to, sadly, because you as a professional journalist, and my background was initially started out in broadcast journalism. I grew up old school, Alex. I mean, it was like, okay, you're going to pursue the truth. There's going to be objective reporting and investigations and that sort of thing. But now that's gone by the wayside. And as you know, today, you probably have most of the predominant number of journalists that have graduated from, my understanding is like 39 they're all from the woke crowd, right?
Unfortunately, yes. I look back, I was at one of the top journalism schools in the world. Actually, it's considered one of the top 10 in the entire world for journalism. And I can count on one hand the number of non-liberals I knew there. As far as the faculty, the professors, there were zero. I actually walked into a business writing class one time. I couldn't believe it. And the professor introduces himself and says, "Hey, I'm Professor so-and-so. And by the way, I'm a Marxist." Like, what in the heck does that have to do with business writing?
Exactly.
Why are you in the business field? So really, even back then, and that was 12 years ago now, it was absolutely dominated by liberals, not just the faculty, but the student population. And as they get out into the real world, even if there were any conservatives who slipped through the cracks, they very quickly figured out, hey, if you want to work in this industry, if you want to work for one of the companies that's owned by, the machine, by the deep state, if you will, you're going to toe the liberal party line. You're never going to call Donald Trump's lawyers and give them, prominent space for a quotation. You're just going to parrot what the establishment is telling you to do. And that's kind of like an unspoken rule that virtually every journalist in virtually every major newsroom understands.
Yeah, exactly. Well, between the peer pressure, if you're in school and you got a professor comes in and says, "I'm a Marxist," well, he's just told you what you need to say and how you need to respond to anything you write and present to him that it better be in the Marxist language, or that you can say goodbye to that, right?
That's right. And this was true across the board. We had a history class. We had to take a few, elective courses and other stuff. We took a history course, and all we learned about in American history was the civil rights movement and feminism. And the teacher was totally clueless. I mean, factual errors just spewing out of her mouth. She gave us the wrong definition of the 17th Amendment. She totally mischaracterized what it was. I forget what she said it was. But I raised my hand and I politely said, "No, actually, the 17th Amendment, that was the direct election of senators." And you could see the smoke coming out of her ears, and she sends me out of the class. I'm just trying to correct the factual record here, so these kids don't go out and repeat that stupid thing in the front page of a newspaper. But that's what you're dealing with.
Yeah, God forbid, you shall remain ignorant. You shall stay ignorant because I've said so. And how dare you question me? I know my son went through the same thing when he was in school as well. And of course, it was difficult for me because, I grew up in a time when you could challenge the professor, and it was welcomed, and it really brought a level of debate that enlarged the intelligence of the people in the classroom.
Yep. And that is historically what academia, what university was meant to be. And if you look at the history of the universities, these were almost every single one on the planet, at least the respectable ones that have some history, were founded by Christians for Christian purposes. And the purpose was to discover truth and to figure out how to propagate truth. And the assumption was that there is truth, right?
Yes, exactly.
And it's gone all totally by the wayside. Now we're having a debate on whether there is truth and whether men should go into women's bathrooms. Academia, unfortunately, has been totally hijacked by the deep state, by the Marxists, by the cultural Marxists. And, we see the fruit of that in these young people graduating from our university. They don't know the first thing about business. They don't know the first thing about creating a sentence, but they can tell you all about climate change and the infinite genders and how the oppression of, historically, it's all baloney.
Yeah. Well, you touched on something that's hugely significant to me. That's the cornerstone of what it's all about, and that has to do with the truth. I mean, decades ago, we bought into this idea that truth was relative, and ever since then, we've been on a slippery slide, and it has cost us dearly, to such a degree that we've untethered ourselves from the truth. And I keep saying, Alex, that we must return to first principles if we're going to get this country back on track. And mind you, a huge majority of Americans agree that this country is on the wrong track. Well, let's go back to the basics and let's make sure we're anchored in the truth, because that would go a long way to getting and righting the ship, right?
No question about it. There's no question about it. And I agree with you, Bill. If we don't go back to these basic truths that have underpinned Western civilization, that underpin the formation of our own country, there's absolutely no way to restore all the other things that went along with that: individual liberty, prosperity, security, economic well-being. All that stuff is going to go by the wayside. All of that was really the fruit of a society, a civilization, a culture based on fundamental truths. And the most fundamental truths is what you'll find. Thomas Jefferson explained it well in the Declaration of Independence: the laws of nature, and of nature's God. That's
Exactly.
what we have to get back to.
Amen. Well, we're talking with Alex Newman, the CEO of Liberty Sentinel Media and senior editor for the New American Magazine. All the institutions that make up our society have been compromised, Alex. And I believe I have faith in the American people. I want to have faith in the American people. 340 million people, the cumulative intelligence of all of us. We can figure this out. And this is where it requires we, the people, to come together. And I think this is where the deep state and the government is a little bit nervous, because they can't control 340 million people. There's just not enough encampments. There's not enough drugs. There's just not enough military force to cause us to comply. But, if we're going to get our hands back on this government, then we need to be focused on those first principles that you talk about, and it will go a long way, because the fact of the matter is that this great American idea has been hijacked. I don't know how to put it in any other terms, Alex.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And, in tandem with that, what we see is this effort to create and inflame divisions where there were none, where there may have been a small division. They want to drive a wedge in there to make it even bigger. And so they want to turn people against each other based on their skin color, right? They want to turn people against each other based on their gender. So they tell women, oh, you're being oppressed by your husbands. You're being oppressed by men. You're not earning. They want to tell, everybody that their enemy is their fellow American, right? It's the Democrat across the street with a Joe Biden sign. It's the Republican because he likes Donald Trump. Really, the enemy is a tiny little core of evil megalomaniacs.
Yes.
And, as long as they keep us divided, Jesus Christ explained it very well. He said, a kingdom divided against itself cannot stand. He also said in one section, will be laid waste. And we are moving very rapidly in that direction. As long as we continue thinking that our enemy is our fellow American,
right,
rather than the people who are actually trying to foment the division, who are trying to get us at each other's throat, there's no way to get back to sanity. And that does begin with accepting certain basic principles. And some of those are enshrined in the Declaration of Independence. God created us all equally, right? We're not going to do this equity stuff where if you have the wrong skin color, you can't get into a university, you can't get a job, you can't get a promotion. If you're the wrong gender, you can't serve on a board of directors. We've got to get back to the first principles, to the basic principles, and those unite us. And those historically have united Americans.
And those are the things that embolden America, that truly make them happy, that they're able to go out and respond to their God-given mandate to go forth, be fruitful, and multiply, and all that represents, right?
No question about it, right? And and I think unfortunately, we're several generations deep now into the government indoctrination of children. So your average young American today doesn't even know those words in the Declaration of Independence. They, under the guise of separation of church and state. You can look at some of the public school textbooks. They won't even quote the beginning words of the Declaration of Independence. So, it mentions God, so we can't teach the children that. Total lie, total baloney. So we do need a massive educational campaign, especially aimed at younger Americans. You know, the millennials are lost. I'm a millennial. It's terribly embarrassing. But we need to teach the things that older generations of Americans learned to the younger generations, because they have not even heard it. And now we have an added complication that these younger people have been conditioned, almost like Pavlov's dogs.
Yes,
they hear certain trigger words, and instead of salivating, they start shouting, racist, racist, whatever it is. And they're not thinking about this. It's not that they came to a rational conclusion. It's just a trained, conditioned response. So we have to find a way to bypass that and show them, hey, these principles are valuable, they're true, and they work very, very well and produce very good fruit.
Well, we need to remind everybody, Alex, in terms of first principles, is that there was a specific infrastructure that our founding fathers tapped into. And that was a God-given, a God-enlightened infrastructure that was undeniable, which goes back to, I believe, the conversation that God had with Cain when he said, if you do well, will it not go right for you? I mean, there is a lot packed in that short sentence, and it screams out to us in the millennium. If we do right, if we're true, and we're in harmony with the infrastructure that Almighty God, the creator of the universe, had assigned and put together, if we follow his laws, his rules, it'll go well for us. I mean, look at the founding of this country, how we were able to take on the number one fighting force in the land at the time, with pitchforks and farmers who didn't know about fighting wars and going out and taking on such a military force as the British. I mean, even our first president, who was really our first commander in chief, who said, but by divine providence, the colonies wouldn't have been able to hold together. This great American idea would have been aborted in its tracks.
Yeah, there's no question about it. And, that is articulated so clearly in the Declaration of Independence. They explain we're going to appeal to the supreme judge of the world. They're not appealing to their weapons or to their superior military commanders. And I love what you said about, going back really to the beginning. I'd go back even further. I say we need to start these kids on Genesis 1. In the beginning, God created. And you can't understand reality properly unless you understand that in the beginning, God created, that he created space, he created time, he created matter, he created human beings. And then you fast forward, and the history that led us to the American founding is so important, and it's been almost completely washed away, right? How many young people today know about the Magna Carta? Right? Exactly. The Magna Carta is fundamental to understanding where the American Republic came from. How many people know about the English Civil War in the early to mid 1600s when they finally settled this debate? Is the king the law, or does the king also have to follow the law? Is the law the king? And of course, they ended up beheading King Charles, which, there's a valuable lesson to learn. The founding fathers had that in their mind. No, you cannot just rule as God. That's why they created a republic. Everyone must be subject to the law. The law says thou shalt not murder. So it doesn't matter if you're the king or a peon, you cannot go around and kill. That's going to be enshrined in our fundamental principles underpinning our government. And even if you can get a majority of 95%, you still can't murder me. You still can't shut down my newspaper. You still can't burn down my church. Exactly.
But here we are, in a sense, defying gravity, Alex. I often say is that, these are one of those, inalienable laws that are right there. I mean, the law of gravity, but yet people still want to defy it at their own expense. And there is so much of the infrastructure that God has established that is just like gravity, that we're kicking at the goads and fighting. But like you said, if you're not willing to go back and even take the opening verse of Genesis, in the beginning, God, not in the beginning, Joe Biden or Barack Obama or any other political figure, God Almighty himself. And this whole idea that there should be a separation of church and state, and what they meant by that, the founding fathers knew that a country without God was going to be death, that it could not sustain itself. And we've lost that along the way because there were these interests that came in, and I say they probably came in during the time of Darwin, because Darwin brought, in a sense, a spiritual pandemic into the body politic, into taking God out of the body politic. And then we get back to the book of Judges so that people can see things according to their own eyes, and do as they darn well please. Well, how has that been working for you?
Yeah, and I think people are going to find out in very short order here that it is going to work even worse than it's working right now as we continue down this path. What you just said is so important for people to understand, Bill. When you have a system where truth is relative, where morality is up to every individual to determine, and we don't have God and truth as an anchor, what ends up happening is catastrophe every time, everywhere, always. I just read a really interesting book by an Indian man who grew up in India as a Hindu. And it's called The Book That Made Your World. The author is Vishal Mangalwadi. And I think for your average Westerner, it's hard to comprehend how critical this is. But when you hear it from somebody who grew up in a society that wasn't based on biblical principles, you really get it, right? No value whatsoever to human life. That people would leave their babies outside their shack to die. Well, it might be a burden. He probably did something bad in a previous life as a cockroach. So this is just his karma coming back to him. No hospitals, no orphanages, no universities, no schools across India until Christian missionaries came to plant those there. And so, all of these wonderful fruits that we take for granted stem directly from that. And when you start losing that, one of the gentlemen that the founders quoted so frequently, the author of Commentaries on the Laws of England, Sir William Blackstone, he explained that the morality and the truths contained in the Bible are binding over all people at all times in all places. Exactly. And when you try to defy that, terrible things happen.
That's like defying gravity, like I was saying, Alex, right?
Yep. That's exactly right. And it will end badly every time, right? You jump off a building. I don't care whether you acknowledge that gravity exists. I don't care if you want to suppress the fact that gravity exists. If you jump off a building, it doesn't matter what you think. You're going to splat on that ground really, really hard. And, it's not going to matter at all. You mentioned Darwin, and I think Darwin did something really critical. And if you read Romans chapter 1, you have this fascinating passage where it talks about people who reject the truth in their unrighteousness. It's not that they don't know that God exists. God is obvious. And in fact, he says, I've made it plain to them. His attributes are obvious. And every baby who's born understands this. There was an excellent study done where they talked to kids all over the world before they're brainwashed by culture, by parents, by school. They all understand they were created by a loving and all-powerful God. And, they can't quote scripture for you, but they know the basics.
Exactly.
And what happens when you suppress that is God hands you over to a reprobate mind. And so Darwin came in and gave all these people who wanted to suppress the truth a convenient excuse. Hey, we can grab onto this and then we can ignore the Bible. Well, look at what has happened since then.
Exactly. Well, we've been on a slippery slide. We have forgotten Imago Dei, made in God's image, and how sacred each life is. And we have become a nation of murderers, frankly. And it is, I think that if you look back historically, there is no nation who has killed its children that was not judged.
Yep. And the Bible says that the blood of the innocent cries out to God for justice. And I can't even begin to imagine what the blood of 65 million innocent babies sounds like. And at this point, I would not be surprised at all if the United States were to be vaporized tomorrow. The only thing we have going for us is that there's still a few righteous people around, made righteous through Christ. Because, otherwise this nation, and it's not even just the slaughter of babies, as if that were just a small thing. The United States is exporting this stuff. I mean, the Biden administration right now is bullying governments around the world to legalize the killing of unborn babies, to invent so-called homosexual marriages. We're exporting pornography to every corner of the globe. Whereas once we sent missionaries and Bibles all over the world, today we send pornography, filth, and ambassadors to go pester you about legalizing the killing of babies. This cannot continue, and it will not continue much longer.
Well, and also, let's not forget, with our open borders, we're promoting this deviancy of human trafficking of young kids. I know when we first, started hearing reports on it, most people, Alex, thought, oh, it's adults. But, we can be thankful for that movie, Sound of Freedom, that is opening up the eyes of America's citizens that are saying, no, we're not talking adults. We're talking 7, 8-year-old and younger, and in that range, that are being brought into this country to be used as sexual objects, to be abused. As one trafficker said that if you sell drugs, you sell it once, but a child you can sell 5 times a day, right? 5, 10 times a day.
Yeah, it's so horrific. And, are we really surprised when a society thinks it's okay to slaughter unborn babies? Are we really surprised to see
Yeah.
horrors like this taking place? There's no value on human life. Many of us have stopped recognizing that every human being is created in the image of God. And immorality now is just running rampant. And, we see the consequences of that, and it's going to get worse.
Well, and as you also say that, our kids are not, are not being taught anymore. It's more like they're being groomed, and of all things, by public educators. This is just absolutely mind blowing to me, Alex.
It is. And grooming is really the appropriate word to use here. I mean, I've talked to a lot of experts on this very issue. And what they say is, what groomers do, what perverts do who want to groom children for sexual activity, they start by desensitizing them. They give them these words, they give them these images so that it's not shocking to the conscience anymore. That's how it begins. And then from there, you ease them in little by little. It's exactly what Planned Parenthood is doing. It's exactly what the United Nations is recommending be done to children all over the world now. These people need to be held accountable. This is monstrous on a massive scale.
Well, and I was amazed here recently. There was an interview. I believe she was a psychologist, Alex. I don't know if you saw this or not, but she was talking about how being involved in, some sort of sexual involvement with adult, that the participation of it, how good it felt. And she was romanticizing this whole idea and not even considering for a moment what it was doing in terms of stealing the innocence of that young child.
Yep. And, that's what happens when you're handed over to a reprobate mind is, the child becomes insignificant to you. The morals of the thing become insignificant. And, this really is in line with human nature. The Bible teaches that mankind is desperately wicked. Our hearts are dark.
Right.
And it's only through God, through Christ, that we can be made right. And so it's human nature to do wickedness. It doesn't mean we'll do the absolute most horrible things we could possibly do. But, when that's unrestrained by morality, when that's unrestrained by a church, and then when that's unrestrained by a government, or worse, like today, when that's encouraged by a government, it's just wickedness runs rampant, and children are murdered, children are groomed, children are abused. And, what could be more horrific than doing that to a child?
Well, you're exactly right, Alex. What we've, denigrated ourselves to. And it's shocking. And I keep praying and asking God, what are the words to say that will hold people accountable, that will stop them in their tracks, to give them a moment of sobriety to where they're able to see the truth and the perniciousness of this kind of behavior and what it's doing. I mean, here we are, the damage that we're doing to kids with, puberty blockers and, sexual confusion, talking about sex. I mean, like, the recurring theme in the Song of Solomon, don't wake up love before it's time. And here we are, we're waking it up and introducing it to kids that are not mature enough to understand what all the sexual experience involves, and we're destroying their lives and their innocence along the way. For what?
It does, Bill. It really does. And the government knows this, right? There was a great doctor who worked in the Reagan administration on a commission that dealt with this. His name was Dr. Melvin Anchel. And he wrote a whole book about it. I was so horrified as I was reading it. And it talks about, being exposed to these types of things as children, the fornication, the sexual relations outside of wedlock, that being exposed to this stuff early has lifelong consequences. This is something that's going to affect your marriage. It's going to affect your future family. And it really is catastrophic on the minds and the hearts of these young people. And yet today, that is the norm, right? That is the norm among young people in America.
Yeah, it is amazing. We're talking with Alex Newman, CEO of Liberty Sentinel Media and senior editor for the New American Magazine. Alex, you have been covering digital currencies, and we're being told it's being rolled out now. They're not holding back, I think, because the Biden administration being in the position it is, and they see that their influence is waning, and there's a good possibility that he will not be reelected. And so the deep state and the World Economic Forum is doing everything they can to move with a sense of immediacy to take over our currency.
Yes, and digital currencies are being rolled out very rapidly. Some nations have already introduced them. In fact, a couple hundred miles less than that from where I'm sitting right now, Bahamas has already rolled out their new central bank digital currency. They call it the sand dollar. This is being coordinated by the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland. Joe Biden is 100% on board. In fact, in March of 2022, he signed an executive order saying the U.S. government places the highest urgency on developing and deploying a central bank digital currency. The Federal Reserve is already running pilot programs and building out the architecture. At the World Economic Forum in Davos, the summer Davos that they just held in China a few months ago. They were talking about they're going to make these programmable so that you can't buy things that the government considers undesirable. They can put a time limit on how long you have to spend them. They can track and trace everything you do. And I mean, they're already abusing us this way now, Bill. I mean, who can forget the Canadian truckers?
Exactly.
Oh, you want to protest the government? We're going to shut down your bank account. Dr. Joseph Mercola just had not only his bank accounts shut down, but his associates and his own family now were debanked. So they'll do this to us now when we still have option to take out cash. What will they do to us when they get rid of cash? We have to fight this with every fiber of our being.
Yeah, all you got to do is look at what's happening in China. I mean, Justin Trudeau looked at China and says, oh, I like what they're doing. That's kind of like the example of what he saw and envisioned for Canada. Joe Biden and others, as they are clearly elite captured by the communist Chinese, would love nothing better than to be able to impose their will. You talk about the ultimate power and control of a political party, right?
That's exactly right. And, the communist China really is the model. And I uncovered this about a decade ago, and I started writing about it. I did a major piece. Actually, there's a chapter in my book about it from some years ago. And at the time, even people who were well-informed, people who knew kind of what these evil globalists were up to, like, no, China might be a part of it, but they're not like that important. Oh, yes, it is the model. They are the driver. In fact, they rolled out CBDCs before anybody, the social credit score that they're doing there. And when you go back in time and look at how this situation developed, what you'll find is subversives at the highest levels of the U.S. government put Chairman Mao in power. They built up this mass murdering regime into the global superpower that it is today, and they fully intend to use that as a driver and a model for what they want for the planet.
Well, we talked about infrastructure. I mean, whether it's the cartels, you got the deep state infrastructure, you got the CCP infrastructure, and we're not talking external anymore, Alex. This is within the United States. We know the CCP has captured elites, the likes of Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, go down the list. Trevor Loudon has done extensive research. Over 100 United States representatives are card-carrying communists, and they bow their knee to the CCP. And, it makes you wonder. I mean, they put their hand on the Bible, swearing allegiance to the United States to protect our Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And it's like, well, what are they doing? Do they cross their finger with their odd hand or something? And they basically have given a false oath to the citizens of America?
Yeah, well, they have no honor, right? When a normal person puts his or her hand on the Bible and swears to do something, that is deadly serious. When people who hate God or wage war on God or reject God do that, they don't care. For them, they might as well put their hand on a coloring book. For them, it makes no difference.
Well, we had a recent I can't remember what she was appointed to, but she took her oath of office and put her hand on a book from Seuss.
Yeah, it's mocking us. It's it is just absolutely grotesque. And Saul Alinsky was kind of a pioneer of this on multiple fronts, right? For the one, he said, because the ends are good, you can use any means you want, whether that's lying, cheating, stealing, vote rigging. It doesn't matter, because it's for helping the poor. It doesn't matter what we do. Then you combine that with this idea of ridiculing everyone and everything you oppose, and you get things like, hey, I'm going to put my hand on a Dr. Seuss book to mock Americans, to mock the Bible, and to mock truth. And again, this is going to end very badly if it's not turned around.
Well, in here, like you say, they tell you one thing, like, oh, they're going to fight for the poor. Well, when have they ever? I mean, let's go back to Johnson, President Johnson, with the war on poverty. We've spent probably somewhere between 25 and $30 trillion. I was talking to Bob Woodson from the Woodson Institute. And I said, Bob, I mean, that's a lot of money what have we done? Have we moved the needle? He goes, well, basically not. And I said, why? He goes, we got to understand 70% of that money went to black bureaucrats. So it's almost like, in a sense, it's an updated version of modern slavery. It was blacks that captured blacks that sold them to America. And now you've got blacks in the bureaucracy who are taking full advantage. They're getting their piece of the pie. And meanwhile, the blacks that need it, it never goes down to them, because they're taking their part off the top. How disgusting is that?
It really is, Bill. And the thing is, if these people actually cared about the poor, a lot of them are very, very smart, right? Which leads me to conclude unequivocally that they are not doing this for the poor. I taught economics for 12 years. And one of the things that we did in my class, we spent a whole 3-week segment on this, is let's look at the difference between nations that are economically free and nations that are not economically free. And so, the Heritage Foundation and the Wall Street Journal produced the Index of Economic Freedom. I have some quibbles with their methodology, but it's as good as any. It gives you a good, rough sense of a country is either economically free or not. So at the top, you have Switzerland. Until recently, you had Hong Kong, until the Chi-Coms came in and put their boot down. You have New Zealand, Australia, right, Ireland. So the countries that are economically free are incredibly prosperous. And incidentally, they're also very clean environmentally speaking. They have nice rivers. The lakes are not polluted. The fish still swim in the sea. And so the wealthiest countries, and actually we plot this on a graph, right? You can plot Index of Economic Freedom score on one axis, and then on the other axis, you can use any metric you want: average income, GDP per capita, whatever it is, just as a general gauge of prosperity. What you'll find is there's a perfect trend line. The more economically free you are, the wealthier your society is going to be. The less economically free you are, the less wealthy everybody's going to be, except for the uber elites. So if these people were truly interested in the well-being of the poor, they'd say, hey, let's look at the countries that worked really well: America, Switzerland, New Zealand, Hong Kong. What did they do? Let's imitate that. That's not what they're interested in. They want control.
Oh, without a doubt. And the thing that's sad, you got to imagine, Alex, in a sense, we saw what happened to Afghanistan. 20 years, they got a little taste of liberty, and then the carpet was pulled out from underneath them. And what it must be like to be able to go to the banquet table and partake in the richness of a free society, much like Hong Kong. I think, wow, what must these people be dealing with on a daily basis, knowing that it wasn't that long ago they were enjoying true liberty and and prosperity.
Yeah. And I think Americans are going to have an opportunity to find out what that looks like here real soon.
Yeah. Exactly. And the thing is that we've allowed our leadership to take us down this road. This is why those 3 important words, and why they don't want you to read, the opening of the Declaration of Independence: we the people. And that is those most powerful 3 words in that Declaration of Independence. It's our manifesto, isn't it?
Yep. And, it's just, to add insult to injury, Bill, and we're seeing this already. They're now telling us that the very problems created by their lawlessness, by their big government, by their intervention in the economy, they're now blaming that on capitalism. I mean, it's like Hugo Chavez reincarnated, right? You got Elizabeth Pocahontas Warren saying, oh, the reason the economy is so bad is because evil, greedy capitalists are price gouging when you buy your gasoline or when you go to your local mom and pop grocery store. What a bunch of baloney. That's the exact same nonsense that Hugo Chavez and every other mass murdering Marxist said right before they started putting people in concentration camps. It's a lie from the pit of hell. And anybody who knows the first thing about economics will be able to tell you, nope, the reason we became so rich and prosperous, the reason why even poor Americans had it better than the wealthiest people in the world even 150 years ago, is because of the free market system, because of the economic liberty that was all rooted in those first principles that we discussed earlier.
Alex, why is it that the people do not get that what Joe Biden did on his first day of office in killing fossil fuels, that was the key domino that tripped up everything, that took us into this inflationary economic spiral dive that we've been in, just bordering on recession? That was probably the single biggest thing, not to mention, all the extra political payoffs and money that he dumped into the system to exacerbate the problem all the more. And even to the degree that shamefully he says, oh, the the inflammation, the
Inflation Reduction Act. Yeah.
Right. That really, it was misnomered. It wasn't, it really didn't. Well, no kidding. We knew that from the get-go, didn't we?
We sure did, and we tried to sound the alarm about it. And unfortunately, the fake media was not interested in the truth. They were interested in selling this lipstick with pig on it for the Joe Biden administration. And, that's the reality. I think Americans now understand. If you look at the polls, Americans don't believe the media anymore. But unfortunately, they don't know where to go to get the truth. So we have a situation where people just say, hey, what's the point of watching the media? There's no point. It's all lies anyway. But so they don't know where the truth lies. And that's what we really have to work on, is we have to reach your average common American where they're at. And we got to bypass the media to do that.
Yeah, it's amazing, because if you look and believe the polling, they come up with numbers and you go, how? Well, how do you think that he's doing a good job? I mean, based on what?
Yep, exactly. And, we got to assume that a lot of these polls are manipulations. They've got a lot of different ways they try to manipulate the results. They oversample Democrats. They undersample Republicans. But, we do have some contingent. I think the last poll I saw said that about 1/4 of Americans still have some trust in the media. Are these people living under a rock? I mean, do they have marmalade for brains? What in the way? How could you still trust the media after they've been caught lying so much, on everything?
Right.
But, some people will never learn.
Well, that's why we like the old days. We quoted the Old Testament. The Old Testament knew how to manage disinformation, right? It didn't last very long. If you were out there as a prophet spewing, some stinking thinking and bad stuff, and it didn't happen, well, then you were eliminated pretty quick, because that let the other people who would be the purveyors of misinformation that you probably shouldn't do that. Maybe you should find another gig so that you can continue to live, right?
That's right. Yep. And, we do need to restore some semblance of accountability, right? What about those 51 clowns from the intelligence community
exactly.
that told us that the Biden laptop was probably Russian disinformation? Who's going to hold these people accountable? They ought to be dragged into Congress right this moment, put under oath, and say, what did you know? When did you know it? And who's going to be held accountable for this? When are they going to be fired, et cetera? And the media, of course, amplify that. The clowns at the social media companies suppress that story. Why has there been no accountability? I mean, we can go back a little further. The injections. Oh, this is safe and effective. You're not going to get COVID if you take your. They lied. They absolutely lied. And instead of going back and saying you lied, you need to be held responsible, we say, oh, let's just move on to the next issue.
Exactly. Well, unfortunately, we have been lied to, and it takes a discerning people. And I think that we're getting to that point where more and more people are realizing who's lying. And these institutions, you mentioned, look at what the FBI did. The FBI knew a year in advance that Hunter laptop was legit, and they said nothing. And they participated in this cabal with the deep state, with, social media oligarchs, to give cover to Joe Biden so that he would be elected. So here we are. I mean, you've got anywhere from, let's just say in round numbers, Alex, 15% of those who said they voted for Joe Biden would not have voted for Joe Biden had they known that the Hunter laptop was legitimate and not Russian disinformation. Well, run the numbers. There's no way that Joe Biden, even with all the shenanigans and manipulation that he did, which 62% of America says they don't believe in the outcome, but the government, and you understand, they got the result they wanted. So they're not going to deposit one dime into confirming whether or not the 2020 election was legitimate, but man, they'll sure spend millions of dollars of taxpayers' money to prove that January 6th was an insurrection, right?
Yep. And of course, we know January 6th was a critical part of this whole operation, right? And we just got some new insight on that from the chief of Capitol Police in the interview with Tucker Carlson. The thing was crawling with federal operatives. So
yeah, I think you had like 3-4 dozen federal operatives that were involved, right?
Yep. And you had Antifa operatives who were at the forefront of this, breaking windows. You had Trump supporters saying, no, don't do that. What are you doing? Why are you breaking stuff? Don't hit people. So this was an operation, and it was a critical operation. If you remember, there was a whole list of senators and congressmen who were going to challenge the fraud, who were going to say, let's kick this back to the states. Let's have a legitimate investigation. And when that happened, Boof, it all
Yeah.
disappeared. And the new narrative was, oh my goodness, you're a Trump supporter. You're a dangerous terrorist extremist and you need to be held accountable.
It took all the wind out of the sail
Yep.
for, confirming whether or not the election was stolen. And to this day, sadly, when you have so many people believing that it was, I mean, this is not the America that we want to live in, Alex. This isn't a win-win for all concerned. And here we are going into 2024, and you've got all these indictments on Donald Trump, this suppression of the vote from a party that says, oh, they're so concerned about suppressing the vote. And what they're doing and interfering with this election is just wrong on so many levels.
Yeah, it really is. And I think we're going to see a repeat in 2024 of what we saw in 2020 and 2022, unless drastic action is taken. And, I think really there's a real valuable lesson here to be learned from what they're doing against Donald Trump and against his associates. We've got Republican states. We've got more Republican states than Democrat states. A lot of these crimes that are being perpetrated against the American people, there's an obvious nexus with Oklahoma, with Texas, with Montana, with Idaho. If some local yokel Manhattan prosecutor or Georgia prosecutor can start bringing down all these people for alleged crimes, where are the Republican prosecutors, the red states, going after the actual criminals who are actually perpetrating horrific crimes against our people and against our republic? They need to take a playbook from the left's handbook, except we can do it morally and with justification while they're doing it just lawlessly. So
you almost think it's inevitable, Alex, because something has got to give, because the thing is about bully, and they're bullies. Okay.
Oh, yes.
And we learned this our first day in school, right? In the sandbox of life, is that if a bully came to you and if you kowtowed, forget it. You're going to be bullied and tormented for the rest of your educational life. So you learn real quick that you have to bully a bully. And this is, it's amazing to me how some of this has gotten lost in translation, is that we must bully these bullies back. If not, they're having their way with us, and they're happy to do so.
Yep. And I think there's several reasons why this happens. For one, we have a lot of controlled opposition leaders, right? They figured out a long time ago that the best way to neutralize your opposition is to run it, to control it. So they as soon as they see a movement growing and people are upset, they'll pop in some fake leader and say, oh, look, he's leading the parade. No, he's not. You just popped him in there. So we got to stop following the fake leaders that are being provided for us. We also need to understand, too, that, there's a big misconception among conservatives. Well, if we just show that we have better ideas, if we just articulate our ideological position in terms that people can understand, everything's going to be fine. No, you're misunderstanding this, right? These people know they're doing evil. They're not misguided. Your ragamuffins in the street may not know, but at the higher levels, they know full well what they're doing. And finally, the Apostle Paul expresses this very clearly in Ephesians 6. We're up against not just flesh and blood, right? It's not just George Soros and Bill Gates and the rest of the clown car. We're talking about demonic forces from the pit of hell that fully intend to do you in. They hate God. They hate you. They hate your country. They hate family. They hate everything good. And we're in a spiritual war here. And you can't just rely on carnal weapons in a spiritual war.
Why is it so hard for the everyday American to understand that, Alex? I mean, is it just that we're so fair-minded, so busy, that we just don't have the capacity to think that a fellow human being would be that diabolical?
I think that's a big part of it right there, is that your average person has no interest in enslaving their neighbor and ruling over, the country. They just want to feed their family and maybe have a little bit of fun on the side. They're not thinking in terms of how do I control people? How do I overthrow the system? But all you have to do is look back through human history. All you have to do is look around the world, and what you'll see is every society is cursed with these megalomaniacs, these psychopaths that will do anything to get to power. Adolf Hitler, Chairman Mao, Pol Pot, Fidel Castro, Robert Mugabe, Hugo Chavez. I mean, we could name names till kingdom come. Right. These people are everywhere, and they don't tell you, hey, I'm going to enslave you and steal all your stuff and kill you and put you in a con. They say, oh, I'm doing this for the people. I believe in equality.
For the greater good.
Oh, the greater good. Yeah, in the name of the people. So we need to understand that there are people like that. They're everywhere. They may not be, more than 5-10% of the population, but they're absolutely ruthless. They will claw their way to the top if it's a company, if it's a government. And they don't come with devil horns and a pitchfork, right? They come masquerading as an angel of light. They're going to do good for you. And so we need to understand that before we can ever get a handle on this, is that there is evil in the world and we have to confront it.
We got about a minute left here, Alex. To your point, look what happened to Germany. 10%
Right.
controlled 90%, right? I'm going to let you summarize things. Go ahead.
Well, I appreciate it, Bill. So we are in the struggle of our lives. Our civilization is at stake, our churches, our family, our country, our liberties. It's all on the line, but we don't have to let it fall, not on our watch. And so I hope you'll get involved, folks. Sign up for the New American. Go to my website, libertysentinel.org. You can get signed up for the newsletter. And Bill, thank you so much for having me on the program. It's always a pleasure, and I appreciate all that you do.
Alex, thank you. I appreciate you as well. Alex Newman, CEO of Liberty Sentinel Media and senior editor for the New American magazine. Our thanks to Alex for coming on today. For more information and to be a part of this mighty Martinez movement to return to God and to save our country, go to BillMartinezShow.com. May God bless you and keep you and make his face shine upon you. May he be gracious unto you and give you peace. Go and be blessed and be a blessing to others. Thank you for being with us. Take care.